East. To further discuss all of this, I'm joined here in the studios by Aylin Ünver Noi. She is here in the studios with me. She is a professor of political science and international relations at Beykoz University. And we also have Professor Hüseyin Alptekin. He's a professor at the National Defense University. Great to have you both. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be understanding the location, the geopolitical location of Türkiye, and try to understand why Türkiye is so important, especially when it comes to mediation across the region. So what you're seeing here is the map of Türkiye. It's a country that's situated at the crossroad of Europe, Asia, and also Africa. But let's take a look at what's been happening in the region. Let's start with the Middle East. See here, almost every country in the Middle East here is under attack. Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, Kuwait, Syria, and of course, Lebanon. So this really goes to show what's been happening in the Middle East, which is very close to Türkiye over the past many years now. But Middle East is not the only area that has embroiled in conflict. We also have to take what's happening on Türkiye's northern side. So for that, let's take a look at Russia-Ukraine, the war that erupted there. And of course, Türkiye has been playing a crucial role when it comes to mediating the Russia-Ukraine conflict as well. If we can move on and bring in that map, which basically shows where exactly Russia-Ukraine are. Yeah, here you go. So again, as you see, very close to Türkiye, Russia, Ukraine, and Türkiye, as we highlighted earlier, has been engaged in mediation efforts in this particular conflict as well. And then moving on, let's take a look at the overall picture of the geography of the region, because I want to highlight one important part. You see Russia, Ukraine over there, and then you have the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. But if you focus on one thing, look at Türkiye. It almost seems like Türkiye has been surrounded by a ring of fire, while the whole region appears to be embroiled in conflict, turmoil. It's Türkiye that has remained calm, is stable, and also appears to be helping in mediation efforts in all of these conflicts. Professor Hüseyin Alptekin, I would like to begin with you. As I pointed out, it almost seems like a ring of fire that Türkiye is surrounded by. How come Türkiye has been able to maintain a stability while all of this is unfolding across the region?
I think you put it quite correctly. It's a ring of fire. And you know, actually, it's even bigger than that. We are just showing a portion of this fire, because the entire region is burning. If you go down to Africa, Sudan right there, even Oman, even Qatar. So the entire region is in crisis. But what Turkey has achieved so far, I think, is Turkey didn't fall into a trap that some other actors might have fallen into. And these traps, for one thing, is the Cold War delusion. Because it's not the same world now. It's not like there are the good guys and there are the bad guys. It's not a fight, it's not a war between the good force and the dark force. So Turkey thinks that the ideologies, the other fancy terms, they can no longer explain. And all these actors, they are all self-interested, they are all interest maximizers. So if you want to prevent conflict and terminate the existing conflicts, you need to find a middle ground for that. So this is one thing Turkey is trying to do, not to fall into that Cold War trap. The second trap is the 90s. In the 90s, the world countries, the nations thought that it's a liberal age, it's the end of history. So we can all come together and we can all have this shared understanding of the same norms. But it's also falsified. We do not share these high norms. Unfortunately, we do not. So I think Turkey is thinking that all these actors are rational in some way, but there are also so many irrational instincts that they go after. So we need to find this real interest of these actors, and we should find some negotiated settlements for these ongoing conflicts. And I think Turkey tried to escape from these two delusions.
Professor Aylin, one thing that I would like to highlight now is that Turkey has also been a member of NATO for over 70 years. And given its geography and the military capabilities, it's the second largest army in NATO. How critical is Turkey today when it comes to reinforcing NATO and securing the entire region?
Turkey's role is very critical in this respect, because since 1952 it's a NATO member and NATO ally, and during the Cold War it provided the military support to NATO, but at the same time Turkey also gained this support from the NATO allies. But since the 1990s onwards this didn't change, because after the end of the Cold War everybody was thinking that, as my Professor Hüseyin Alptekin also said, that the liberal world order won over communism and there will be no war anymore because there will be the unipolar world. But this didn't happen. And all the ethnic conflicts and the other conflicts around surrounding region of Turkey indicated us that there is still a geographic location of Turkey matters for NATO. And so that's why this, and even today, we are seeing that increasing number of conflicts and the geopolitical rivalry of today indicates us that Turkey's geography matters, not geography, but also at the same time, as you said, that it has the second largest military in the NATO. And at the same time, last year, June 2025, NATO assumed an important role in NATO. And also, it will last 1 year. Turkish Navy will be responsible for this. And in taking responsibility in deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic alliance system. But at the same time, it provides Turkey to be immunent from these attacks because being a member of the NATO ally, it also benefits from the Article 5 of the NATO treaty. And so it's a mutual defense clause and collective part of the collective security of this alliance. So, but this doesn't mean that Turkey is just rely on being the member of NATO, but it's since its establishment, it tries to develop its relations with all neighboring countries. When it established, the Republic of Turkey established, it signed the friendship and non-aggression treaties with all neighboring countries. But this didn't change. Still, Turkey's active neutrality and balancing diplomacy policy, this is the Turkish foreign policy of today, is also enabled Turkey to play a more active role in mediation and also make it a reliable and trusted actor for many states. You talk about even the African states. Most of the African states today sees Turkey as a reliable partner in mediation efforts. So this is an important and prestigious thing for Turkey, but not just in its mediation efforts, in its relations with those countries. Also, its mediation efforts is also taking place in the United Nations, OSCE, because it's also launched several initiatives at these international institutions. And at the same time, it changed its Ministry of Foreign Affairs, added new segments like the Director General for International Mediation, to increase its capability of its diplomats in conflict resolution activities. So Turkey, especially this geopolitical rivalry, increase in the conflicts surrounding regions, compel Turkey to play such a role. And I think, and not I think, many states also thinks that Turkey is a reliable actor in terms of mediation.
Now, you know, I want to bring our attention back to the map because I think what we're discussing here can be explained really well by looking at the location of Turkey, especially given the fact that the entire region appears to be engulfed in a state of war, a state of conflict. Professor Alptekin, how much of that has to do with the investment that has been done within Turkey into the local defense industry?
I think it's a lot related to Turkey's local defense industry and its capabilities. Because unfortunately, we passed a stage in the 90s when we thought that the international institutions with no credible enforcement capabilities, they can prevent conflicts, they can deal with the onset of the conflict, they can solve the root causes of the conflict. But that was proven wrong in time. So what Turkey is trying to do now is to develop strong deterrent capabilities. Because without these deterrence mechanisms, unfortunately, the nations in the region, they fell into these conflict spirals. And Turkey, it's using its diplomacy, these negotiations like we saw in the grain corridor in Ukraine, like we saw between Somaliland and Somalia, like we saw between Egypt and Sudan and Ethiopia. So this is traditional interstate diplomacy. But that doesn't cut it. You also need to enforce certain things in the field. And this is what Turkey tried to do in the Azerbaijan and Armenia conflict in 2020. This is what Turkey tried to do in Syria, by backing the rebels against the Assad regime by using real muscle in the field. This is what Turkey tried to do in Libya, to stop the encounter, the violent escalation between the two parts of Libya, between Tripoli and Trablus. So sometimes when it comes to that stage, you need to make a presence, a physical presence in the field. And Turkey is doing this sometimes directly with troop deployment, but sometimes indirectly by empowering the state authorities and sometimes the legitimate rebels if they are fighting against operation like we saw in Syria.
And Professor, as you were talking, we were playing pictures of some of Turkey's defense capabilities, and I mean, I have to say it looks pretty astounding. I mean, we were playing pictures of her jet a short while ago, then Kizil Elma, of course, you can see it there. And then obviously over the past many years, we have seen Turkey being one of world's leader when it comes to drones, the UAVs. Professor Aylin, to what extent do you think all of this has reinforced, number one, Turkey's defense capability, and also Turkey's leverage over mediation when it comes to conflicts in the region?
Yeah, Turkey's defense capability is developing in recent years, and also it's one of the fields that provides opportunity for Turkey to develop its relations with many countries, because the defense cooperation with other states also giving a chance to Turkey to develop these relations, and also sometimes it might have used this as a game changer in some conflicting areas, as we have seen in the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the Second Karabakh War. So this is important, but at the same time, Turkey all the time is using this as a deterrence and defense. This is two important things, and and also Turkey always respect for other countries' territorial integrity, independence, and sovereign rights. So that's why having this defense industry and focusing on its developing, investing heavily on defense industry doesn't mean that Turkey has an expansionist policies. On the contrary, Turkey wants to see more stability and peace in its region, and develop the regional cooperation among the states surrounding its region. I would like to give you an example from the Balkan platform initiative. For instance, it brings together many Balkan countries in that platform to discuss their disagreements through diplomacy. So all these efforts indicates us that all these things just contributes to Turkey's major aim to maintain stability and peace and prevent the emergence of the future conflicts. But also there is another role Turkey played. We should mention about that, because Turkey also prevents some tensions and crises to turn into conflicts in the Balkans, particularly in recent years. This is important because since 2010 there were some crises emerged in this area as well. So that's why Turkey has experience, willingness, and also the capability to play mediator role all these conflicts.
Right. I think you've made some really good points. And Professor Alting, let me come to you. So listening to what Professor Aylin was saying here, I mean, it seems to me the advancement that has taken place within Turkey, especially in terms of mediating conflicts across the region, has significantly increased. And all of this has happened under the leadership of Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. So I want to focus on President Erdogan's personal diplomacy here. How much do you think he personally can do at this point to bring down tensions in the Middle East?
I think he can do, and he did a lot in terms of using initiative, in terms of taking the lead. And I think that's partly because of his own individual leadership characteristics, but also it has some systemic repercussions. And I think it has some other underlying reasons too. Because right now, we all have been talking about the shift in the global geopolitical configuration. We know that there are rising powers in the world, starting from China to the rest of the BRICS powers. We know that the United States is changing how they deal with the global affairs. And in such dramatic shift environment, the individuals can take more initiative. And now we see a rising trend between different global leaders. And I think it perfectly fits how current American leadership sees the world. They see the world in terms of the personalities. When they look at Turkey, they see Erdogan. When they look at Russia, they see Putin. When they look at Europe, they don't see anybody. They see weak institutions. And when institutions get weaker, when norms are not backed with credible enforcement mechanisms, then it comes to the individual skills of political leaders. And I think Erdogan has quite experience in this negotiation table. And I think we saw some fruits of that endeavor over the past years regarding with the prisoner exchange in Russia-Ukraine war, also the grain corridor between Russia and Ukraine, back to the post-war negotiations between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And I think Erdogan is willing to use his experience and his leadership potential in all these conflicts. And I think it has a welcoming effect in all these conflict areas. And also the global superpowers, especially the United States, I think it is also welcoming Erdogan's increasing role in negotiating these ongoing conflicts.
And very quickly, Professor Alptekin, based on what you just told me and looking at this map, is it fair to say that now Türkiye is a global diplomatic actor?
For sure it is. It has been for a quite long time. And with all this devastation, I think we will need more actors like Türkiye, not to try to isolate itself, but to engage with the conflicting parties by gaining the trust of each party in the conflict.
Fascinating insights. Professor Hüseyin Alptekin, thanks very much for joining me here in the studios.
Pleasure.
And Professor Aylin Ünver Noi, again, thanks very much for your insights.